possible by viewers like you and hover.com, an easy way to find and register a domain name. Use promo code REACH to get 10% off. Tonight's narrative is made possible by viewers like you and hover.com, an easy way to find and register a domain name. Use promo code REACH to get 10% off. And hello, everybody. Welcome to Tuesday night's narrative. It's 7 p.m. on the East Coast, 4 p.m. on the West Coast. Hello, Eric Garland. Nice to see you. It's been a couple of days.
Hello, Zev Shalev.
How you been?
I'm great. And you're leaving out some time zones. We might have some Canadians tuning in. You're in Canada.
So I am in Canada. We still have the same time zones, actually. So it's it works for us too.
Couple, sir. So it's 8:30 p.m. in Newfoundland. So
thank you. You're correct. You're correct.
Fredericton, New Brunswick. It's 8 o'clock p.m.
Are so knowledgeable about things, aren't you? Aren't you so knowledgeable? That's Canadian. Canada does have Canadian. Canada has different time zones. People, it's quite challenging if you have to actually adjust time zones to the 30 minutes. It's one thing adjusting it by an hour or two, but adjusting it to the 30-minute mark makes it quite complicated. We have a lot to talk about tonight, but there's nothing structured. There's nothing sort of organized, but there's just so much stuff going on. I'm going to throw it all into a giant soup of news, and we'll discuss as we go through it. I should remind folks that you can, support us at patreon.com/narrative. That's patreon.com/narrative for as little as $5 to $10 a month. You can support freedom. And I should also tell you that you can, if you're watching on YouTube right now, subscribe to Narrative by hitting that subscribe button or smashing the subscribe button. People still say that. And also that little bell that appears next to the subscribe button is important because it reminds you every time we're on the air, which is, of course, critical for you to remember. I want to start today with the events out of China, which is not surprising. There's events out of China and there's events out of DC that involve China. And, the Congress, the Communist Party Congress just wrapped up, and it wraps up under very difficult circumstances, one can say. I mean, there's definitely been a consolidation of power around Xi Jinping. There's no doubt that he's taken the Communist Party, far right in American terms, and the liberal progressives of the CCP are no longer in contention there. They're no longer even in the cabinet. They're no longer even in the Politburo. They're just being disappeared, and we'll show you some of that tape in a bit. And at the same time, there's been all this intelligence activity here in the United States around espionage. And I know you have a lot of thought about all of this. I've got some tape to play, but including the Merrick Garland press conference from yesterday. But I think let's just talk a little bit about what your overall impressions are about China, Eric, because I think that there's so much going on as we've been covering here on Narrative.
Well, I come from the world of competitive intelligence, which covers a lot of economic espionage. Or doing defense against that kind of thing. There's nation state partners with that, but that's one of my bailiwicks. And the Chinese have been notorious for this for decades now. And if you talk to anybody who's in a university setting who has to deal with intellectual property, especially like information technology, they'll tell you who the number one threat is there. And, Russia has its problems. I think they do quite a bit of the ransomware work. But in terms of extracting economic espionage or extracting intellectual property from the United States for their use, it's the Chinese. And this is turning up in places like, their hypersonic missile designs, where there are a number of companies who have been stolen from, or they have worked, they have violated sanctions.
What's going on there? You're talking about hypersonic missiles?
Oh, there's a lot of U.S. technology turning up in new Chinese designs,
Mm.
and the engineers who made that, and it's classified, they tend to recognize it if they see anything about it. So
Right.
yeah, that's
That's no
pretty serious
fun.
stuff. Eh?
That's not fun at all. It is very serious stuff, and we talk a lot about China here on the show because we've been doing the Dragon's Tail, which is our report on the vast amount of information we've now collected around China's attack and the untold story of their attack on the United States democracy since 2016, maybe even before 2016. So we've been probably at the leading edge of this revelation, not necessarily funny revelation, but fun, but interesting revelation about China and everything that they've been doing. And that is interesting as we see things being borne out in the newscasts as we put them out on a daily basis or every other couple of days. There is so much going on, and it's Merrick Garland brought. I was surprised by that press conference yesterday. Were you surprised by it? I was a little taken aback by firstly, Merrick Garland showing up for the press conference. He doesn't do every press conference the Department of Justice does, but then they don't normally do this kind of stuff out in public. Counter-espionage is not something that happens in criminal courts most of the time. It happens, as you pointed out in your great thread the other day, it happens in, behind the scenes. It's espionage. It's secret. But here it was playing out on television
That's
screens.
the
rumor. You wouldn't know. How would you know? But Eric, seriously, tell us a little bit about how important this press conference was, because it's really unusual to have an event like this happen.
Well, the goal of most counterintelligence is to neutralize the threat. Because if we're going to bring you into a court of law and arrest you, even if you're a foreigner, you get rights to the U.S. Constitution and the federal rules of criminal procedure, and you have a right to disclosure. Now, right. In the case of something that has to do with espionage, they're often classified documents that led to, the government building its case. And there's usually a very thick wall between the criminal division and the counterintelligence divisions and FBI and DOJ in general. And there has to be some crossover there. So the general approach towards counterintelligence is to figure out who's messing around, who they work for, if they're, a national of that, if they're a citizen of that country, or if they're being employed by somebody to work as an intermediary. Figure out who they are, what they're doing, what they want, and then you try and close down the threat to the nation. That's not the same thing as prosecution. Prosecution is collection of evidence, which is not the same thing as intelligence. And evidence has to be, available to present to that defendant's counsel. So there's a whole bunch there we might not want to let go. As a result, you just don't see that many espionage prosecutions. The one going on with Tom Barrack in the United Arab Emirates, if I could name check that just real quickly for contrast here, that one's going forward. They've got his like text messages with these Emirati officials, and our old buddy Tom Barrack, who's Donald Trump's business partner in that stupid hotel in DC, and he apparently staffed the campaign. Barrack staffed Trump's 2016 campaign.
Yeah.
And right. He ran all the finance for the inauguration. He was like the lead guy. Well, he's been accused of... What's that?
Yeah, Manafort hired, yeah.
He met Paul Manafort in 1972 in Saudi Arabia. So these are old hands at this game, right? It's been accused by the U.S. government that Barrack is an agent of the United Arab Emirates, and they have these hilariously obvious text messages where he's like, "Hey, did you like the last interview I did where I talked about you guys on television? Well, I'm going to go on national television again because I'm working with Donald Trump, who's my buddy. So what do you guys want?" I mean, the definition of an unregistered foreign agent is someone who's working with high-level people like that. And Barrack's testimony was that he didn't really know they were with the government. And if you look at the government's indictment, it says, like, official number one, worked with the emir. Official number two was a high-ranking officer in the armed forces. Official number three was on the National Security Council. My joke there is like, what are we supposed to believe that's a mom and pop, like, organic, farmers market, National Security Council, and armed forces, and not the government one? There's usually only one per country.
I guess that's what he's trying to say. I mean, ignorance is no protection from crime, right? I mean, you still are prosecuted for a crime regardless of the fact that you say you're ignorant of the realities of what was going on. But let's get back to this case. You know, I was interested. Maybe we should spend a little time talking about what counter-espionage is and what espionage is, because there are two different things. And most people don't realize when they say, you know, a lot of the complaints we hear a lot of the time is like, why hasn't Merrick Garland prosecuted Donald Trump yet? And a lot of the stuff might be happening behind the scenes in a different kind of investigation. It might be happening in a counterintelligence investigation. Now, as you point out, they're separate, but they're all housed in similar agencies. So you get counterintelligence in FBI, but you also get criminal in FBI. And the counterintelligence is not really in the pursuit of criminal indictments or criminal justice. They're not looking to throw people in jail. They're looking to neutralize threats that are coming from overseas. And they do that through many, many different ways. They could do it by neutralizing agents. They could do that by countering those agents' moves with other moves. They can, do any number of things that espionage or spies do. You'll see a James Bond movie. It's not that actually dissimilar in terms of tactics. Certainly, the character's more wound up, but there's the same kind of activities that's going on. Lots of arms dealing, lots of human trafficking, lots of important meetings with important people and yachts and pretty ladies. You name it. I mean, it's all there probably in the spy world. For good reason, because that's the way you get access to all the big leaders in the world and how you can influence them, whether it's through friendship or business or money or you name it. There's many ways to do that. So can you tell people a little bit more about what counterintelligence really is?
Well, counterintelligence is generally knowing what kind of operations are running against your country, very often on your soil. But we split this up where the FBI does the counter spy work on U.S. soil, and the CIA does it out in the field, out in other countries. And these people, of course, travel back and forth. The messages travel back and forth. So there has to be a certain amount of teamwork there on recognizing threats. But what's the difference between espionage and counter espionage? Espionage, you can be just trying to listen and learn things that you can try and have an effect. Like, there's some countries that try and change the dynamics of elections in other countries. You may have heard of this. Right up there
entire
to
movements, run entire political parties, run scandalous campaigns in different parts or scandalous events in different election campaigns to neutralize candidates they didn't want elected. There's all sorts of things you can do.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, what are the defenders doing to try and stop that? Well, they're trying to figure out who these guys are and catch them. And one of the ways you can do that is you can put a little bait out at you give them someone in the government who they think is somebody that they're trying to attract, like somebody who is maybe not that loyal to their nation. They might have another set of loyalty to a country that they might be related to with family members. And those agents will try and recruit somebody, usually, in a sensitive spot. It could be a corporation, but very often if you have somebody in the government who has access to knowledge and you can flip them to work for you, then that's awesome. But then there's the old thing called it being a double agent. So what happened in the case that Merrick Garland brought to our attention yesterday was there were some Chinese agents trying to get some insight into the prosecution of Huawei, which is a Chinese telecom company that makes a whole lot of spy gear that the Chinese have been trying to get near our military bases and generally serves the purposes of the Chinese state. And so they found an agent that was feeding them information about the process or the progress of the prosecution. And it turned out the documents he was feeding were counterfeit and were tarted up to look classified and weren't accurate because in reality, he was a double agent. He was acting like a traitor, but he was really one of ours. So
I love it when a plan comes together. Here is Merrick Garland's press conference from yesterday. And this is unusual. It's unusual for a criminal investigation to lead to criminal indictments for people involved in espionage, but it's not that unusual anymore, actually. But it is certainly an unusual thing for the Merrick Garland to show up and release this particular press release. So this is the DOJ announcement of Merrick Garland yesterday. Let's take a look.
Over the past week, the Justice Department has taken several actions to disrupt criminal activity by individuals working on behalf of the government of the People's Republic of China. As always, the defendants in these cases are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Earlier today, in the Eastern District of New York, a complaint was unsealed charging 2 PRC intelligence officers with attempting to obstruct, influence, and impede a criminal prosecution of a PRC-based telecommunications company. The complaint alleges that in 2019, the defendants directed an employee at a U.S. government law enforcement agency to steal confidential information about the United States criminal prosecution of the company. The defendants believed that they had recruited the U.S. employee as an asset, but in fact, the individual they recruited was actually a double agent working on behalf of the FBI. As the complaint alleges, the defendants paid a bribe to the double agent to obtain non-public information, including files from the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District. They did so in the hope of obtaining the prosecution strategy memo, confidential information regarding witnesses, trial evidence, and potential new charges to be brought against the company. The double agent provided the defendants with documents that appeared to present some of the information they sought. In fact, the documents were prepared by the U.S. government for the purpose of this investigation and did not reveal actual meetings, communications, or strategies. This was an egregious attempt by PRC intelligence officers to shield a PRC-based company from accountability and to undermine the integrity of our judicial system.
So those are biting words. It's bad news. There were two big headlines out of that press conference, because the first one was about the 10 Chinese spies and government officials who were accused of the malignant scheme. And then the second part was about
three different cases brought.
Right, there were 3 different. Oh, well, why don't you explain to everyone?
Well, there was a lot of tea spilled there about the variety of different intelligence operations. And again, I got to admit, ever since Trump and his cronies came in, I've been talking about intelligence stuff in public in ways I never used to. And that has nothing to do with me and everything to do with Jared Kushner and these idiots and these obvious foreign agents. It's kind of crazy. Yeah. And I just not used to having doing reactions to press conferences, but this is inside baseball. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Just to see, but
so we're lucky to have you.
There were 3 different operations that they busted by putting them in criminal charging documents. One was about how there's a think tank that's really just a spy center. It's that the people that are employed by this think tank are hold on, I can.
That the strategic one that we just spoke about Wengi the other day. Interesting.
Give me half a sec.
It's okay. It's one of those shows.
The Institute for International Studies. It's USV Wang Lin, Bi Hongwei, Dong Ting, and Wang Chang.
Oh, interesting.
Yep.
That's not unusual, but the fact that they're calling it out is actually quite unusual.
The Institute for International Studies was a purported academic institute ostensibly operating as a component of Ocean University of China, located in Qingdao, China, which MSS intelligence officers described in this indictment used as a cover institution for their true clandestine intelligence activities. And those are words that you usually read on a document that says classified at the top.
Yeah,
it is not out in front of polite company. That's
number one. You got the Institute's think tank. Yeah.
Then you got the guys who were dealing with a double agent.
Yeah.
Who were trying to protect Huawei.
Yeah.
And then the third one pertains to our buddy Guo Wengi.
Oh,
because
really?
It's about Operation Fox Hunt.
Oh, okay.
And it was about they indicted a few people who were harassing someone who's not one of Steve Bannon's friends.
Oh,
but they were trying to get him to go back to China to do whatever they wanted. I mean, and one of the things Attorney General Garland made very clear is stop coming to our country to bring your autocratic abuses to people that are resident here, whether they're citizens or not. We protect them.
It's been happening a lot. They basically are coming to America or coming to Canada, wherever they might be, and kidnapping Chinese nationals that are living in the United States, often citizens in the United States, kidnapping them and returning them back to mainland China. And we're not really sure what what happens then. I mean, are these people supposedly prosecuted there? Are they then turned into assets? Are they, what are they? And, it's very difficult to get insight into what exactly happens in China. And of course, China has also been accused lately of opening up all these police stations in the United States and in China, in communities where, under the guise of being there to, renew passports or whatever. But really what they're there for is to keep an eye out on the communities inside the United States or inside Canada, and keep an eye out for any people who might be dissidents or speaking too much out about the Chinese Communist Party. So it really is the long arm of the Chinese Communist Party reaching into the United States and Canada with these individual police stations, but also these kidnappings, which have been happening quite commonly, surprisingly commonly. So that's the third case that the DOJ brought.
Yeah, and it relate because it's Operation Fox Hunt, of course. Guo Wengi was sort of a fake victim of that.
Right.
He's not really being pursued. He's the pursuer.
Yeah, so that's the Dragon's Tail. Everyone needs to catch up on all the sixth episode. I think a sixth episode drops tonight. So maybe it's 5 and 6 actually drop tonight. So please check it out. The Dragon's Tail, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're on Apple, you can get to watch them. If you're on everything else, you can watch and listen to them. Oh, sorry, you can just listen to them. But if you're on Apple, don't forget that there is an audio feed and a video feed for our podcast. Just look up Narrative Live. That's NARATIV Live. And you'll find all our podcasts. So just Google that and you'll find all our podcasts there. So all of this is happening as China is doing its own rebuilding, rebranding. I don't know what you would call these. Some people have called it Xi or Xi maximum years that we're going through right now. The ascendance of Xi Jinping as the supreme leader of China, but also now in his third term, and who knows how long he intends to stay in power. Now, something really wild happened during the Congress over the weekend because the former leader, Hu Jintao, was removed from the main stage. He was sitting next to Xi Jinping and then was removed rather unceremoniously because of some event that happened just prior to that. The official word from the Chinese news agencies is that he wasn't feeling well. But the actual video does not look like that's what they're talking about. So I'm going to play a brand new video that just came out either earlier today or late yesterday. And it shows us from Singapore television's camera's perspective what really happened on that Congress floor. And, this is a lot of inside baseball around Chinese Communist Party motives. But this is important because what happens with this council, what happens with this Politburo is how we will know the future of our tensions with the United States. I mean, with China at least. Sorry, are we going to be facing war? All these kind of things that are just pressing against all our national security brains are going to be determined by this group of people. So let's take a look at what happened. This is moments before Hu Jintao was escorted out. So you can see his deputy over there. Hu's also a progressive dude apparently, handing over this red dossier of information, and she is looking over somewhat concerned. He calls over to the side. They're having some sort of disagreement about who should actually possess this document, this dossier. They're talking to each other, and then comes the guy that she has called from the side. You see this attendant who shows up. He's wearing a mask there. She just called him over, and you can't see the rest of this. It's just because it'll come back to. The guy is being asked to leave at this point, and I'm not sure if I put this up full screen, we'll be able to see it more clearly. They're still debating the dossier and who should have this thing in front of them. And now comes the attendant that she had called over, and he's going to ask for Hugh to be removed. He doesn't tell him directly; he just tells his associate that he needs him removed. And that binder is now in the hands of Hu Jintao's deputy there. But notice what the attendant is doing. He moves it over back to Hu Jintao. Then it gets moved back to the deputy. Now they're going to have a conversation about that, and Hu Jintao is asked to leave with that same binder. She turns away, pretending not to really notice, but he does, of course, notice what's going on. This is happening on live television in China. And there is the supposedly unwell but looks fine Hu Jintao, who's old but not certainly in any frail condition, but is refusing to move. He's refusing to be taken away from his position. This is an incredible embarrassment for the former president of China, and he is going to be ultimately ushered away.
That kind of public humiliation in China is a big deal.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
I mean, that doesn't look comfortable for anybody, but this is public humiliation.
And notice as he's been taken away, Hu Jintao does ask Xi if he supports this, or at least that's what it looks like he's asking him. Xi then nods yes, yes, yes. And I think this might happen right here. He's asking him, and then there's a yes, yes, yes. And then off he goes. He says goodbye to, or touches this guy on the shoulder, and then everyone else looking straight ahead. No one's really paying attention to their liberal colleague there being removed from the main stage at the Congress, at the Chinese Communist Party Congress. I mean, this is an unusual video. What does it really mean?
Kind of a purge feel to it. I mean,
oh yes,
I want to hear the transcript of what was said and the translation, but that had sort of a Mao Zedong, Stalin kind of feel to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not something that has been seen regularly before, but it is a very open demonstration, a show that Hu was, unloved or unliked by Xi and was going to be removed publicly. That could have happened any number of ways. It did not have to happen behind the scenes. Now, the question of this red dossier, what's in it? Does it contain anything of value? We don't know. We can't tell. We could tell that the person standing or sitting next to Mr. Hu is Li Zhanshu, and he is another liberal guy in the Politburo, and then to the very right was Wang Huning, another sort of progressive figure in the Chinese Communist Party. They've also all been removed from the Chinese Politburo Council, the main council there, which is 200 and something people, if I'm not mistaken. So the liberal voices, if you would, in a American way of looking at things, you'd see the progressive wing of the Democratic Party being taken away from the chamber. I mean, that's really what that's equivalent to, and you're being left with only hardliners. And it certainly seems that within his core constituency there, between his core, at least the main Politburo Council, he's consolidated power. So only he has his supporters there on now. Only people who are going to be yes men to his hardline policies are available are now in those bureaus, in that Politburo Council, which means you're not going to get the kind of dissent that Hu Jintao might have provided before. So this is an unusual thing. It doesn't happen in public. It's certainly about humiliating the former president, but it's also an indication that we are in a very new era where Xi Jinping is now very much in charge of China. He's consolidated everyone. He's purged all the opposition, and he intends to do things his way, which could mean anything, really. I mean, China's in a very bad state of affairs right now. They have the COVID issues they've been having, GDP missed targets today. We're looking at an incredibly challenging economic environment for them, and one in which they're also raising their military might. And that could lead to any sort of confrontation if they are, stressed to the point where they feel like they need to strike out.
China's got a lot of major stresses, even before the implications of the prosecutions that were announced yesterday. They're being taken out of the supply chain of any number of economically important sectors, but just the semiconductor issue alone, the fact that they're coming out of the world market for semiconductors, which has needed to happen for a long time. If you kind of know some of the inside baseball there, they've had a lot of backdoors in that hardware for many years now, and so it was time to take it back and put the foundries in Southern Ohio, which is what the Biden administration is orchestrating, which is great. It's going to bring some good paying jobs here, and China can go play by itself for a little while. But think of the pressure that's, between the Evergrande real estate Ponzi scheme bubble blowing up, the fact that we're shutting them off from stealing our research and stealing our scientific research, and not just the applied like technologies and stuff like that. They're going to get shut out here of a lot, and they cannot keep. Something to remember about how big that country is, over 1 billion people. You have to keep growing jobs along with the population growth, right?
Yep.
Or you have people going hungry. And when you have that many people angry at the same time, a lot of people forget how much China has to contend with domestic disturbances, thousands per year. Because remember, there are, to reach 1 billion people, you're talking about a number of cities the size, of Boston and Minneapolis that nobody here has ever heard of, that dot the country. And, also smaller towns and cities where there are corrupt local officials who are not under the control of the party enough necessarily. And the locals get angry and sometimes, try and give the guy a pitchfork ride. That happens thousands of times a year in China. And that's what these dudes have to try and prevent while they're pocketing all this money while they live on the coast.
Yeah.
In
I mean, the
Beijing,
challenge,
Shanghai, Shenzhen. So, now look at the macroeconomic problems that are of their own making. Look, they were integrated into the Western economy. We sent them jobs, we sent them money, we sent them technologies, and they smacked us in the face over it. And they decided that they wanted to run the world, and they wanted to run it autocratically. And, I don't think we really appreciate them flooding the country with fentanyl with enough to kill like all of Ohio in a single day, or all of Texas. I mean, this is happening all the time.
We're kind of COVID. I mean, COVID was you'd think a Chinese operation of some sort. At least that's our thinking regarding at least how they handled the containment of it and how America handled its containment. It certainly feels like COVID was theirs. What you're pointing out is so interesting, because as you've said many times on the show before, America sort of got addicted to the cheap prices of all these products that were arriving, and we sort of over the years have given up our ability to compete. And we became, maybe it was part of their plan all along. Who knows? Maybe we were just
the high cost of low price.
Yeah, the high cost of low price. But it's that whole investment in China has come to roost, and now we're facing a very different situation where these guys do have a lot of money, they do have a lot of influence around their part of the world, and they do have very new, interesting military capabilities which we've not previously encountered. And what you're saying there about needing to grow the population in order to grow GDP, which is what they need to keep the population contained and happy, is also a problem for them, because they just don't have enough food. I mean, at the end of the day, they don't have enough arable land in China to keep supplying food to this growing population, which is growing at a huge rate, which they need to grow for GDP. So, it's a conundrum.
They need to grow. They need to develop jobs.
Right.
And a lot of those have come through their integration with the West, and that's going away.
Yeah. But jobs are GDP, and GDP is reliant on growth. It's ultimately, you need to feed those people. When you make people, you got to feed them.
Also, there's some tension there, because like they have social media too, right? Yeah. And every once in a while, you'll get the child of somebody in the Politburo will start taking some selfies with their Louis Vuitton bag, with their vintage champagne, and that will get shut down, and they will get a visit from somebody. But the reason for the strong response for showing off wealth like that is, remember, there's a lot of people in Western China, there's a lot of people everywhere in China that do not share the lifestyle of these robber barons that run the country. And as the economy starts to recede, as they get cut off. I mean, remember, we've talked about on this program the Quad Alliance of Australia, United States, India, and Japan. What were they doing? Locking China out of the rare earths extraction and refinement business, because they don't get to control. They wanted to control the electrical future, the moving to the grid, the dealing with climate change. China wanted to be in control of that, but they're not. We are. And, as all that happens and we shut them out of that, and people start going hungry potentially as a result of these things, they're not going to blame us. They're going to blame the men that were in that room. So when she has Hu Jintao taken out like that, it's a reminder to, and we can't know if that was pantomime, if that was to try and show how she really means business, and maybe Hu Jintao was in on it. We don't know. These can be complicated matters. But either way, you're trying to spread the message that there was one guy in charge and you have to listen. Now, that's a very nervous person. And he has much to be nervous about.
And he's not that young himself either. He's getting on in years, and he's a little frail himself. We have lots more to talk about China when we return, but first, a quick 60-second break, and we'll be right back on Narrative. Hi there, it's Zev from Narrative. Have you ever had a great business idea but just didn't know where to start? Well, one of the first steps to building a new business is a domain name by Hover. That's because it's more important than ever to have an online presence, and your domain name by Hover is your first step in building your online brand. Hover.com makes it quick and easy to find the perfect domain name for your business with over 400 available extensions. And with their Connect feature, you can easily connect your Hover domain name to many popular website builders with just a few clicks. Plus, Hover offers free Who Is Privacy. That's free Who Is Privacy that protects your personal information from being released online. Don't let the complicated search, sign up, and connection process of other domain providers stop you from starting your online brand today. Hover makes it easy to get started, so what are you waiting for? Find your perfect domain name at hover.com/reach. Plus, Narrative Live viewers get 10% off right now if you use the promo code REACH, that's REACH, or go to hover.com/reach. Hi there, it's Zev from Narrative. Once is enough. But you got the message, didn't you? Hover.com/reach if you have a domain name. I bet you come up with a lot of good business ideas, Eric. I'm sure you're a prolific business idea guy. You have lots of good ideas. So,
I like building websites, and that's no lie.
Yeah.
And I like the Hover. I've not yet registered a URL with Hover, but I probably will soon. And it seems a lot cleaner and quicker a process than some of the more well-known registrars. So
it is easy to find a domain name on there. I found, if you search for a business or whatever under a certain category, it'll give you a bunch of ideas right away without you needing to actually go in there and come up with your idea first and then plug in a domain name. It gives you a bunch of ideas around the category in which you're looking for, which is, I think, actually kind of useful if you're doing a domain name check. So that's hover.com. But first, let's get back to all the other stuff we were talking about, which is China, because along the route here, as she's consolidating power in China, as Merrick Garland is prosecuting all these spies and indicting them for, espionage, there is this new word from Donald Trump that he intends to challenge the 22 election results. This was in the Rolling Stone, and here is the writer of that article explaining what they're talking about.
We reported at Rolling Stone is that over the past several months, Trump has convened a number of in-person meetings and conference calls with a variety of Republican attorneys, activists, longtime political allies and operatives, and different organizations with the express purpose of discussing on these calls and these meetings, okay, if things end up going sideways for us in the 2022 midterm elections, particularly in critical states, he's talked about places like Georgia and in particular Pennsylvania, what are some of these scorched earth legal and courtroom and public relations measures and activist measures that we can take to quote unquote stop the steal this time around, so 2022 doesn't become 2020 in a sense. And the reason we know this in our reporting is not just because of people talking to us anonymously about this. As you might have noted in reading our report, much of this is on the record. Some of whom were directly in the room with former President Trump. This is something that they are all very proud of trying to lay the groundwork for, which they might not even need, because of course Republicans could just, end up being declared the winners of the Senate this time around. But it's all a part of engineering from the top down in the Republican Party.
So it's it's not surprising that Donald Trump is doing everything he can, maybe, to challenge the 22 elections, even though he's not running in these elections. It's kind of weird for him to be
it's weird, isn't it?
interfering. And,
God.
who's he interfering on his behalf? And where is he getting all this money from? I mean, it is a fortune to do all these things. And yet he seems to have a never-ending supply of dollars to do all sorts of
He had like
mischievous things.
$100 million left over after Jan 6, I'm pretty sure. And that's some of what he's using here.
Probably, but it's still a lot of money. Where's it all coming from? Like all these backdoor donations that are hard to trace and aren't really legal donations could be coming from anywhere in the world. Which reminds me, just because I like to tie things back to this topic of the show, that she and Trump have a particularly close relationship, as we've shown you in episodes 1 and 2 of The Dragon's Tail, where we showed you the visit to their forbidden city, which she took Trump on, which is a very unusual visit to take someone like that. You certainly didn't see Obama going to the forbidden city. He never got that privilege, but Trump did. And you see here this photograph of this military, what do you call those things? Salutes? Something of the arms or the chest, so the troops checking. What's it called again? When you check troops, there's a name for it. Anyhow, someone will tell me on Twitter. But there was a lot of very big ceremonial welcoming of Donald Trump. At the same time, as there was also revelations of a $200 million loan that Donald Trump owed China way back in 2016. So, as you look at his continuing political life, which sort of extends far beyond any other typical US president, how is he maintaining this political life? And he must be doing so through some sort of funding from somewhere. I mean, it's coming from somewhere. Is it coming from his previous donors? Who knows? I mean, we're not saying it is, but it's an interesting thing to note.
Well, I was going back through the Tom Barrack indictments, which is talking about Barrack's activities in 2016 and when Donald Trump was on television when he was. And so I was going through some old transcripts from when these guys were yammering in 2016. And Donald Trump was telling, I believe, George Stephanopoulos that he's in debt to no one and he's got just so much liquidity. It was him or Jake Tapper. He probably said the same thing to both, but he's like, I have no debt. I'm all liquid. And if I needed debt, I always could.
Yeah.
First of all, I just think it's really interesting that Jake Tapper and Judge Stephanopoulos never played that tape back and said this guy was lying. He was in debt to China. And then interestingly, we're the only ones who talk about that big old Chinese loan, but Trump was lying and he was in debt to China the whole time he was running. He was in debt to Deutsche Bank. He was in debt to,
a lot of everybody. Yeah, I mean, look, there was a concerted effort to kill that story. I remember the day that story came out, it was in Politico, and then right afterwards, there was a retraction of sorts in that they clarified that the money had actually been taken out by the Bank of China and moved to other places. That turned out to be unprovable. I mean, the correction piece was unprovable. But it seemed like someone at a PR agency had stepped in and said, you've misunderstood the loan or something like that, but it was not the case at all. It was just merely, I think, a cover story for, the loan still being out there and that Donald Trump had to pay for it. They said that it had been bought out by some other entity within China and was no longer his loan, yada, yada, yada. But I don't think that was true. And that sort of took the story away from us. But it's interesting that, there is a lot of coverage on our part about China's involvement, and there's starting to be a little bit more in the press, but there's not a lot of China coverage in terms of their attack on democracy and how they were involved in the attack of democracy. And we've been following it a lot in terms of its on a national level, in terms of the national politicians, but also on a local level, where in your state, the candidate for the Senate seat that's open, Mr. Schmidt, it's Eric Schmidt, right? Just to remember.
Yes.
Quickly.
Last night, Donald Trump gave full support to Eric Schmidt because Eric Schmidt would like a full report card of the most condemning facts possible in one political career. It's really astounding what the guy's done in 2 years.
So Eric Schmidt is now part of he's always been part of the Donald Trump world. I mean, he was part of the organizers of MAGA. He was of the January 6th event. He's certainly been involved in a lot of things.
He's been at Leo, Leonard Leo's Federal Society stuff. Oh no, he's in the whole thing.
Yeah.
But do you remember when Donald Trump gave his first I think we talked about it on the show. His first endorsement. He said,
Yes.
"I support Eric," and you had Eric
Yes.
Greitens, the disgraced governor, and Eric Schmidt, and I thought he meant me.
I
mean-
he would endorse you 100%. I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, him and Putin would like to endorse you. Putin endorsed you by giving you that incredible honor of being on the sanctions list. Well, didn't he?
That's right.
Weren't you on a
It
sanctions
was already
list?
done for me.
That was a fun time.
But
Yeah,
it's interesting who Donald Trump backs up, isn't it?
Well, it's
gotta
not
say,
surprising. It's not
he's a helpful
surprising.
guy in some ways. Like, he
I bet you if you did a Venn diagram of China's endorsements or China's wishes in the candidate field and Donald Trump's interests in the candidate field, they would line up pretty closely. I'd imagine. I suspect they would.
So think about we have to have all these January 6th hearings. He's doing them in public. Like the next January 6th will be televised. Like he is criming and treasoning on open source phone calls. This doesn't have to be, we wait for the Zell and the J6 group on somebody's signal, like after a congressional hearing on the thing or subpoenas. He's just doing it in front of everyone and all the people that are still going along with this. I mean, have you thought of how insane this is? We are currently prosecuting people for this as we speak.
Yeah.
We haven't even mentioned the craziest thing from yesterday, where Clarence Thomas comes out on the shadow docket unilaterally and says he issues some ruling at SCOTUS that Lindsey Graham doesn't have to testify before the grand jury.
I forgot about that.
Trying to overthrow the 2020 the election. And these guys are this is a senior senator in an American state, and these guys are panicked to the point they're like sneaking in the back door in the middle of the night and issuing a Supreme Court ruling and then running. I mean, and then on the other side, you have Trump, who is doing the exact same thing with new people who are like, yes, I want to be in front of a grand jury. I can't wait for indictments. Please give me all the prison.
It really is stunning. I mean, that move by Clarence Thomas tells you a lot about who he is and how he cannot be on this court. Never mind his other colleagues that were put in there by Trump. But it's astounding that he's there, considering Ginny Thomas's involvement in January the 6th, and that he's issuing rulings on Stop the Steal and in an attempt to defraud their voters of Georgia. And here he is issuing judgments or orders on these cases that Ginny Thomas was directly involved in lobbying officials in each of those states to not put the right electors up for the election, for the vote on January the 6th. I mean, it's stunning that he has any involvement in something like that. How can he not recuse? But yet here he is issuing late night, verdicts on orders on things that he really has no reason to. No right, in my opinion, to be even judging.
And remember, there's a federal grand jury in DC looking at this stuff, right? This is the Fulton County District Attorney's Office that's doing this, and a Supreme Court justice is like throwing himself in front of a bus to protect Lindsey Graham from having to appear in front of a local district attorney's grand jury when there are other ones that exist. And do you remember why the district attorney's office is handling it and not the attorney general's office and the U.S. attorney's office that would normally have jurisdiction?
Yeah, conflict of interest.
They're conflicted out.
Yeah, exactly.
So
not to Clarence Thomas, not conflicted out because he doesn't have doesn't have to follow those rules. He basically, the Supreme Court has its own way of functioning. It doesn't have the same rules as the judges and the federal judges, which is unusual. There's
something I'd like to remind the viewers of if they're wondering about this. There is no higher court in the land. No, once the Supreme Court has spoken, that's it, right? And they have a lifetime appointment, right?
Yeah,
they have that job forever, so they cannot be fired. And that's the whole point, is that you want impartial justices. I mean, it would be terrible if the president could fire a Supreme Court justice. It would destroy the integrity of the judiciary. But I would like to remind the viewers out there of something. That does not mean immunity from prosecution at all. So
that's interesting. Interesting. It's
if these actions are let's think about what Thomas is doing. He is using his position potentially under color of law. That is a serious thing to accuse a Supreme Court justice of. But if he is using his position as a state actor, i.e. a Supreme Court justice, as part of a criminal conspiracy, it could be considered, if what Ginny Thomas has done is illegal. It seems quite illegal. If it's illegal and they're investigating those crimes with multiple grand juries as we speak, and he uses his job position under color of law to run interference for a criminal conspiracy, he becomes part of that criminal conspiracy, and he could be very easily charged under 18 U.S. Code 371 or seditious conspiracy.
I love your enthusiasm about this. I just don't see it happening, but it's a great
enthusiasm. It's analysis.
It's analysis, but I'd like to see that actually happen, because I've said a lot about Ginny Thomas on the show before. Let's just play out the tape here a little bit, because say the GOP were funded by all these Chinese cutouts, if you will, and all this other Chinese influence that they're being provided by the increase now in influence campaigns and social influence campaigns by the Chinese and other things like that. We've, imagine the GOP gets into power, and their first order of first thing they're going to try and do is basically challenge the debt ceiling. So not that they've ever cared about the debt before. I mean, it's been ridiculous. They've never thought about debt before as being an issue for them. They seem to have grown the debt in the last administration, the Trump administration, by $3 trillion or so. But now they're concerned about the debt ceiling, which is an attempt to really shut down the government. So right on the heels of a potential Trump or GOP victory in November will come a shutdown of the government. So anyone who's voting for the Republican Party is voting for the shutdown of the government, and probably a prolonged one. The other thing is they're going to start investigating Joe Biden and bogging down the administration, which is trying to fix everything that the Trump administration did, with all these investigations. These are the two big issues for them on their mind, as the world is facing, all these major pressing issues, from inflation to oil prices to potentially conflicts. Certainly there's already in Ukraine, but potentially in Taiwan. The geopolitical competition between the United States and China. There's so much going on, but their number one concern of the GOP is to do what? To shut down the government. Who does that really serve? Who does that really serve? It probably serves China more than anybody else, because it's certainly not helping the United States run.
I mean, Russia's kind of in a bad spot. One gets the sense that Joe Biden's talk with Saudi Arabia might have been fairly definitive. China, China's the closest to us as a peer in terms of their size and influence.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that they are not in as supine a position as Russia is. I mean, let's face it, we've kind of heard the last of Vladimir Putin. Like, his army's gone, his PSYOPs are busted. We've sanctioned him, into the Stone Age.
But don't say that too soon, because he's still fighting, and he still has this call up. We haven't even seen the full effect of this call up into Ukraine. We don't know how many people he got. I think it's going to be a terrible war. I've been there with you all along. I think it's going to be a disaster for him. But it doesn't mean he's going to stop right now. And it's certainly this is going to be the last chapter in.
Oh, and I don't want to stop kicking the crap out of him.
Yeah. But it's going to be bad. I mean, I think the bloodbath that we're still expected to see in Ukraine is quite serious. And the thing why I would challenge you a little bit about the Putin survivability is because he really is China's man. I mean, when you look at the way he rose up through the Soviet ranks and through Russia, ultimately become the president, he did so with a lot of help from the Chinese, who were in fact upset with Gorbachev because of his support of the Tiananmen Square protesters, and they sort of overthrew Gorbachev and replaced him with Putin and Yeltsin, obviously, and replaced him with Putin, which is a far more hardline approach to things. And by all accounts, Putin and Xi still have a very good relationship. They've they're best of friends, they claim, and they're on the same aligned strategic mission for the next 30 years, which involves the Arctic and a bunch of other things. So it's not so easy to take out just, say Putin's done. I mean, whoever replaces Putin might just be another China crony.
Well, I think that's a good counter argument there, that, if Putin sticks around, it's because he's Xi's employee. I don't think they're friends. I think there is a subordinate relationship there.
I agree.
Now, take Dmitry Rubovlev, who owns half Monaco and bought Trump's house up and all this other stuff. Well, who does Rubovlev sell that fertilizer to? Chinese agriculture. So China still needs Russia, and Russia still needs China. But that's going to be a real odd couple, situation there for those guys to sort of openly go it alone.
Yeah, well, I think that's what they intend to do. I mean, I think that's the plan. I mean, that's why when, it was interesting when Putin and Xi met last month, I think, Xi told, Putin we understand Xi's concerns around has questions and concerns around the Ukraine war, which was an interesting admission that there were questions and concerns around the war itself. But Xi never mentioned anything in his response. And these things are, as I've spoken about before here on the show, are often very choreographed. One leader says something in order to allow the other leader to say something, and so that it'd be an interesting little bit of tension, but it not be overblown. But it was interesting that he stayed silent after Putin had acknowledged that there were questions and concerns on Ukraine. And then the next week, we saw the call up of the 3 million or 1 million or however many people are going to show up for Putin's war. It's interesting. Those are just chronologically, that looks like a very scary series of events. If she's calling the shots to that minute detail in Ukraine, in Russian foreign policy, but who knows? I guess the point of tonight's show has been to try and pull together these threads that say China's here. China is very much an issue for the United States. We have an espionage challenge around them, that there's been now these 10 arrests. There's been 2 very high-profile arrests involved in trying to steal or obstruct the justice in the investigation of Huawei. You've got this remarkable theater which showed the progressive leader of the Chinese Communist Party, Hu Jintao, being taken off the stage, very publicly removed from the stage by Xi Jinping. And then, supposedly he was ill, but that does not look like the case when you look at the video. It looks like there was something else going on. And then his 2 deputies, the 2 liberal deputies that he has, they are no longer part of the main Politburo that rules China. So a lot of the liberal wing of China has been carved out by Xi as he consolidates power and becomes much more hardline. On top of that, you've got this potential comeback tour of Donald Trump trying to challenge the Pennsylvania and Arizona results. Just a general economic and geopolitical situation, which makes it kind of tough for China to find its way in the future as they face low GDP. They missed their GDP targets today. They are facing a COVID policy, which is strangling their economy. And they also have a mortgage crisis, which is really hurting them. So all of that is on Xi's plate. And it happens to be our problem too, because they're our number one adversary. So, worth paying attention to in any event. Last words from you, Eric.
The Biden administration is very different than the Trump administration in how we handle these matters. It's even quite different from the Obama administration, and also very, very different from the Bush 43 administration. I think that we had more than 20 years of really allowing China and its sub-allies free reign in this country. Financial maneuvers they made, but espionage as well. And the Biden administration is the first, and hopefully not the last, of the administrations to push back and insist on American sovereignty and security. And I'm pretty darn happy to see it.
Yeah, and just as another point on that, I mean, certainly when you look at the comparison between these 2 parties, the majority of money that goes into American politics, through all these back channel ways through China is landing up in the GOP. It's not landing up in the Democratic Party, as far as I know. I'll have to double check that, but I got I said the majority. I said the majority of it. There's certainly some of it, but the reality of it is when you have still a figure, maybe a leader of the Republican Party in Donald Trump, who is beholden to China in the way we have been describing his loans, plus all these his immediate inner circle being connected to China, as we've been describing in the Dragon's Tail. It's very important for people to understand that the GOP, even though it's weird to say it out loud, the GOP is actually aligned with China. When you align their political views, their political thinking, that is who they're trying to support. That is who they ultimately support. Even just looking at the war in Ukraine, which of the parties is in support of the war of Ukraine in terms of supporting Russia's side of it? It happens to be the GOP. It's the same kind of situation with China. There's a lot of money being poured into the businesses and into the companies surrounding the GOP, and so that money's coming from China. So, if you're choosing between the GOP and the Democratic Party, one side is the Democratic Party, the other side is the GOP/China. So make your choices carefully. There you go. That's the show for tonight. We'll be back on Thursday. Thanks for watching. We'll have another episode of Dragon's Tail by Thursday, if I can finish writing it. And what do you have coming up? Anything interesting in the week that we need to know about, Eric? Anything else you want to promote?
Yeah, I'm going to vote here in Missouri. Because we have got to look at progress and good news when it's out there. We got 2 solid weeks of no excuse needed absentee voting. They're already opening up polling places 2 weeks in advance.
People need to vote. We saw in just a little note here on what's happening in Canada, as you pointed out to me earlier, Eric. We've got just had a municipal election in Canada where for a country that normally has a very involved electorate, it was like down in the 20s, almost just below 30% in the city of Toronto, which is normally a very politicized and politically active city. And Canada is no stranger to Chinese occupation. We're in the same kind of financial stronghold as many in the United States are, where you've got this incredible amount of money being poured into these cities, an increase in the crime rate, the mob takes over, the Chinese mob shows up. It becomes a very, very, it's not the same kind of city that you used to expect of. You used to expect when someone used to say Toronto. It certainly is a very evolved city. And yet to see that people didn't vote, it's terrible. So guys, vote. If you have a vote, you get to actually choose your representative. If you don't exercise your right to vote, you don't get to choose your representative. They just get to work for somebody else. So vote.
And the people that are supporting perhaps your least favorite candidates, they are in favor of you never voting again,
and are actively pursuing to take away those votes. So there you go. That's our public service announcement. Have a good night, everybody. We'll see you on Thursday. Every minute of Narratives reporting, every story that we break is made possible by our patrons. You too can become a patron by joining at patreon.com/narrative.
Narrative, where truth lives. One day, you'll tell the story of autocrats, crooks, and kings who came for our freedom. A story of citizens who stood up to tyranny and won. The people prevailed and renewed an old vow to a more perfect union. And that was just the beginning. The story continues. Narrative, where truth lives.